Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Today, I'm joined by Will Youmans of Forefront Software, the founder and lead developer. Thanks for joining me, Will. It's a pleasure to finally get to talk to you in person, as it were.
Yes. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, definitely. So can you give me a little bit of background on yourself and your journey so far to where you've come so far?
Sure. I've been a web developer since before I care to admit, starting out, in I think middle school when I bought, I think HTML for Dummies book. And it's just been a wild ride since then. I went to college and got a degree in math and went to the corporate world. I started out working on aircraft software for private and corporate jets, but quickly discovered that the startup world is what I was interested in doing. So after a few years of that, I started out as a junior developer, working at some agencies and startups, and kind of worked my way up to leadership, which is where I am today. Currently, I am running the Forefront Software, the web development agency, and also have my my startup CTO Sumo, kind of trying to productize the interim CTO position for startups and companies with smaller budgets.
Yeah, definitely. That was what actually how I found you. It seemed like a really interesting element that I definitely want to get to later on in the episode. So, yeah, like you, I started so many years ago. I started development before there was a web. So, yes, I know what you mean. I've been in this game for quite some time, but luckily I still love it. How about you?
Absolutely. It's, as I said, it's a wild ride, but I love every minute. Well, most minutes of it.
Well, you couldn't enjoy the ups if it weren't for the downs. Eh?
That's exactly right.
So how big is Forefront?
It's me and a few contractors that I use from time to time, and a few interns. One of my favorite things to do is to find green talent, people interested in web development in the startup world. I hire them on as an intern, and I kind of use them as a case study for mentorship, really. So I've used Forefront Software as the kind of company for that initiative, really, getting developers up to speed so they can be hired by startups, kind of give them experience of how web development is done, both communication and actually developing the software, and then mentoring them as they develop software and get them prepared for the real world.
Oh, that's fantastic!
It's a good way of having young talent that's interested and eager to learn, but can be used relatively inexpensively.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite things is mentorship. I love sharing the pains that I've already experienced and the hard-won knowledge that I have through many, many, many ways not to do things.
That's right, exactly.
Which is kind of the point of this podcast.
Right, yeah. Remembering back all the mistakes that I made, I'm, trying to make sure that, a lot of times it's good. Those mistakes were good, you learn from them, but, things can be much smoother and less frustrating along the way if they're given some heads up there.
Yeah. What's the typical client of Forefront?
It varies all the way from, small marketing websites for small businesses. Right now I'm working on a site for a corporate restaurant chain, all the way up to startups. And that's kind of was the impetus to starting CTO Sumo. Over the last few years, I've gotten the opportunity to kind of play the role of interim CTO for some startups. and doing everything from defining the architecture of their software to hiring their team and mentoring them, as we talked about already. So really, the whole gamut of that kind of work is under the Forefront software umbrella.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So, what would be something that you found really surprising that you learned through building Forefront?
Sure. I think that when you're a junior or mid-level developer, you focus really on improving your tech abilities, your programming abilities, and really focus only on that. Which is extremely important, and your performance in that area is important. But a lot of times, and myself included, I focus on that over kind of the human side of web development. Communicating with clients, and doing billing and some of the business side. So that's been a challenge over the years. I think by this point I've figured it out, but that's something that I wasn't quite prepared for. When I went to it was kind of my freelancing business that turned into something a little bit more.
Sure.
And it's just I never really considered how much time is spent on those sort of unbillable things, compared to doing the fun stuff, the development.
Oh, I definitely understand that from Medit, my current startup, that
Right.
that the finance work and the team elements that you didn't expect to need to do. So,
Right.
I've been in plenty of leadership roles before, but those were more team lead, mentorship, not, having to deal with interpersonal things and ensuring people were happy and all the paperwork that needs to be done. And
Right.
that was really a shock to me. So with all the junior people that you've got coming on, have you picked up any significant shortcuts to bringing them up to speed or to developing them?
I really, really wish. No, it's really, working with them closely day to day, finding a good balance from micromanagement and kind of leaving them alone to figure it out on their own. My initial strategy was maybe doing a little too much micromanaging, and it really doesn't allow them to grow or really learn how to learn. I think that part of a very important thing that's not really talked about a lot for developers is learning how to learn, because technology changes. There's always new fads and new things that clients are going to want, and you need to be able to quickly go from never touching it to being proficient, so you can build what clients want. So it's more important to know how to learn than what a for loop is and how to properly use it.
Yeah. Once you've kind of gotten down the syntax of one paradigm of programming, right, it's not that hard to pick up a new one. Of course, you have to learn all the libraries and syntax and special dependencies and things like that. But it's so much easier once you understand the logic behind it.
Right, exactly. And it's been really interesting as my clients have moved more from jQuery front end to something a little more structured like Vue or React. Seeing how these junior developers I've watched, seeing how they take what they've learned and apply it to this completely new way of thinking. It's just really interesting. How it's really just interesting to watch and can mentor them through that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So onto the CTO Sumo.
Sure.
What is it?
Sure. It's really my effort to productize the concept of an interim CTO. So I'm noticing more and more that startups, whether they're well funded or not, are really finding it tough to make the leap from having just a regular development team with a couple of leads to the actual CTO role, which is extremely important, but can cost $200,000 plus benefits.
Sure.
when really a lot of times what they need to bring them from early stage startup to something a little bit more robust and scalable is more of an interim CTO position, someone who can kind of pave the way for hiring of a real CTO when the time comes. And so my idea for CTO Sumo is to have, it's kind of a SaaS product, it's billed monthly. You get a certain package, a certain amount of consulting hours that really can be used in whatever way the client wants. My vision is that it would include not as much actual software development, but more, higher level thinking, taking, auditing whatever legacy software they have, making architectural decisions so that it can be scalable and used as the company grows, as well as hiring the technical staff, whether it be supplementing whatever their staff is currently, or mentoring any existing staff to get them to a position where the company can succeed. And the goal is, when my time comes to a close, I would be helping the company hire a full-time CTO to take them to the next level.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I work I'm part of an accelerator program, and some of the other members of the cohort and other cohorts have asked me for assistance in looking for CTOs, looking for developers, understanding what's reasonable within quotes for software and proposals, not having any technical people. So they were able to create MVPs that were able to verify, validate their problem hypothesis, but having to transition from that to fully sustainable software, there's a bit of a difficulty, and I really haven't had great answers for them. Because I only have so much time in a day. Right. So I could see how this would be something very useful. There'd be people who would say you'd be a bit crazy not to have an actual tech person, right, with senior experience embedded in the team from the beginning if your core offering is going to be software. Right. What would you say to that? In regards,
that's a really good point. First, what you're describing there is exactly the problem I'm trying to solve. I see a lot of startups who develop that MVP, working with an accelerator, or people volunteering their time, like you're referencing there, and then struggling to take that to adding features and scaling the company. So my goal would be to be there to help them with that, whether it means taking the existing MVP and building on it if it's built well and in a way that can be scaled, or if it means, starting from scratch with a more forward-looking architecture. And to your point, though, yes, I think that it would be definitely in the company's best interest to have a developer that stays from the very beginning. Whether they play the role of lead or actually get the CTO title is not as relevant. But a lot of times it's really an issue with cost. You have startups who have, $50,000 or something to have an MVP and get the first 1,000 customers. And a lot of times that's not practical to have a full-time development lead. And so my service would be there to help that. It's billed monthly, cancel anytime, providing consulting hours to solve their problems, whatever those problems may be.
Okay. And have you thought through the transition from CTO Sumo to the full-time CTO? How you might ease that transition?
Yes, I actually have a case study. I've been working with a startup for about 3 or 4 years now. I started as the freelance developer when their old freelancer flaked out. Worked on building the software, hiring the engineering staff and mentoring them. And I'm still involved in that. And right now, actually, we're in the process of bringing on board an actual CTO and CIO. And so, yes, this is definitely something that's currently being I'm currently spending a lot of time thinking about. And what we ended up doing in this case is we hired 2 leads. One of them handled more the infrastructure side, with the goal of him taking on the role of CIO if he proved himself. And then the second developer was the lead of the customer targeted app or software. So obviously he would be the one who would take on the CTO role. And so those titles haven't yet actually been officially bestowed upon them, but we're in the process of that right now. So I'm looking forward to this being a very successful case study.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Because that was one of the first thoughts that I had, was that that would be difficult, because I can just imagine trying to transfer all the knowledge I have from what I've built to someone else in a semi-short period of time. And I don't know how I'd be able to do it. I mean, we do have documentation in Confluence, but as a startup, your documentation is never up to date because things change way too fast to try to keep up with that.
That's right. And I like to say at this startup that legacy knowledge is my job security. It's just for that exact situation you're talking about there. And that's why it was important to me not to hire someone for that CTO role and then kind of disappear. I think that would really, I wouldn't say cause the company to fail in any way, but definitely add some frustration as that transition happened. I think the easiest way for this transition to happen would be to hire them and work alongside them for months even. And it's been months in this case, so that the transition would go as smoothly as possible and as much legacy knowledge is transferred as possible. Because we also have documentation in Confluence, and it is not only not up to date, but definitely incomplete, because we have 4 years of legacy knowledge that is constantly changing.
Yeah, that's one thing that non-technical founders need to understand, and I think as technical folks, we may not do a good enough job explaining all the complexities that are involved with software development. I don't even know a good analogy for it. But that every single decision makes every subsequent decision harder to change.
That is right.
So to understand all the threads, I guess it's kind of like trying to, as we're coming up on Christmas, trying to untangle the holiday lights for your Christmas tree. If you pull the wrong thing too hard, it becomes such a ball of knot that there's no way you will ever be able to untangle it. And you just basically have to cut out what you can or throw it all away and build something.
That's exactly right. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Sometimes if I would come in as an intern CTO, it may be necessary to throw out, what was created for the MVP, but definitely not as my exit.
Yes.
It definitely does not make sense to start over. And yes, everything builds on each other. And, decisions were made for business regions, in the moment for whatever reason. And a lot of times that decision doesn't make sense later, or maybe, it conflicts with future decisions. And those things need to be communicated so that the transition can be very smooth.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different constraints when you're making decisions that, it could be financial, it could be time-based, it could be education-based. All those together are usually some factor of it. So why didn't we have this in place before? Well, because we couldn't do it in the past. This technology has only been, recently invented or recently become mature enough to trust it in production, or we didn't even know it existed. So yeah, it's a tough one, but it's good to hear that you've got lots of plans laid on how to transition that. And I think most people would have some view on that, but it's just nice to hear you be able to articulate.
Right. And it seems like what we've been talking about right now, or up to now, has been kind of higher level, like, business logic decisions and documentation, but it also goes right down to the code too, as well. You're going to make decisions through the development that may not make sense later, and definitely build on each other, which is why it's extremely important at my exit that we have good, test coverage, because there's no way anyone, even me, can know everything that's going on to a point where we're not going to have regression bugs as we make changes, add features, deal with bugs. So having a robust test suite, which is, never ever found as part of an MVP, is part of my strategy as well, so that my exit can be successful.
Yeah, that's really good to hear too. The more testing you can have that's automated, the better.
Right.
I'm definitely guilty of not having enough, although I don't know that I would ever say it's enough. Our API is well covered, and every time we commit to master or merge to master, the integration tests are automatically run and before it's shipped or as it's shipped into test environment. So I'm happy with that. But there's a load of areas where I'm still up at night thinking about, what if that goes wrong?
I'm sure.
What sort of tech has you excited at the moment?
Sure. I focus primarily in two areas. I don't know if you're familiar with Laravel.
A bit, yeah. I used to be a PHP guy, but not recently.
I love Laravel, and in fact, the startup that I've been referring to throughout this call is a Laravel shop. We have several Laravel apps and are pretty deeply embedded in that ecosystem. I also do some Node.js development as well. So those are my two areas of focus. It seems like lately I've been focusing mostly on Laravel. I just love the community. I know you're not completely familiar, but for any listeners out there, I highly recommend getting into Laravel. Just the community is great, support is great, a lot of really helpful tools to build solid, even scalable web applications.
Yeah, back when I was using it, trying to think how long ago it was, 12, 13, 14, 2014, 2015, maybe. Even then, the community was pretty solid. The amount of libraries and packages available weren't quite to the level of Node and NPM.
Right.
But then again, I've never heard of a disastrous security issue like I've heard of at least twice.
Well, that could be just because, security by obscurity, but yes.
Yeah.
I think those dates you're referring to are about when the startup started. So back in Laravel 4.2. The community as well as the software has matured a lot since then. I think the long-term support version is 5.5 right now, and 5.7 is the latest release. But it's just served this startup very well. There's a fairly low learning curve for developers because, everyone has done some WordPress development in their life. It may not be the sexiest thing for developers to work on, but it definitely has provided us a really stable development environment and something that's been really fun to work on.
Yeah, no, the stable is always good.
Exactly.
Being able
that's something that takes some time getting junior developers to understand. And, simplicity and stability is really much more important than the latest greatest.
Yes, absolutely. And it's usually, I think you either mentioned it or alluded to it, that it's usually easy enough to find PHP developers.
Right.
Sometimes their PHP code wasn't so good. That doesn't mean that PHP is bad. That means that it's so easy to get into that it's easy to write bad code.
And a lot of the most popular frameworks, you said WordPress, and that's a good example, but Craft or many of the other ones are really geared not really for software engineers. They're geared for marketers to be able to do development. And so it really fosters some really bad habits that we have to kind of mentor out of some of these junior developers as they come on, give them, encourage them to move away from a lot more of the procedural development that's encouraged by WordPress and others to a lot more of the object-oriented, the MVC that is encouraged by good frameworks like Laravel.
Sure. Is there anything that you can think of in a general instance that you'd want to tell an incoming CTO So not quite specific to the application, but just in general, as you were doing the transition, that would be good to share with listeners.
Sure, a few things. One thing that caught me off guard, transitioning from the lead developer role to something more managerial, you have to be deliberate about the amount of time and effort spent on coding versus management. You can't do 100% of both, but ultimately you're, responsible for 100% of both. So I think that being okay with not doing all of the development and delegating a lot more than you're maybe comfortable with, I think has been a bit of a frustration for me as I took on these roles. That and the people side, I mentioned that earlier, but the CTO is a unique role. When you hire a developer, a lot of times, you ask where you see yourself in 5 years, and you're often trying to determine if they are wanting to follow the software engineering senior track or if they're more interested in the management track. But the CTO role, from my experience at least, has been a balance, a tough balance to find, but a balance between those two concepts, really. So you're responsible for the tech. You're making a lot of the architecture decisions. Deciding which vendors we're going to be using, but also you're responsible for mentoring the team. So you have to exhibit a lot more of those soft skills that really you haven't had to use really as a lead developer.
What the way I think about that, and I may have just this moment solidified the way to articulate it is
you're welcome.
Thank you very much. As a developer, it's about what I build. As a CTO, it's about what we build.
That's exactly right.
Now, obviously everyone is a member of the team, but still you can only really control your effort when you're as a more junior member. But it's all about becoming a force multiplier to be a CTO.
That's right. And really checking your ego at the door, because a lot of times behind the scenes, you're putting out fires and making important decisions, even if it's actually coding them. But, letting the team shine over your individual effort is really important, even if it's just for company culture.
Yeah. Do you have any tips on cultivating a good culture?
Yeah, well, I think communication is really key. I was talking with the CIO this morning, and he mentioned that leading from the front rather than from behind is really important, because the team needs to see you energized about the product and energized about the team. Because you could be working in the background fixing bugs and making really important decisions that no one sees, but they need to know that you're there supporting them, as well as when you're doing PR reviews and code reviews, being firm but kind is very important there. Developers need to know that they can make mistakes, and the team's wrath won't be on them. So mentoring through in that way, I think is important for company culture. Yeah.
Great point. Yeah, definitely a great point. Is there anything else tech-based that you think that we haven't mentioned that is really important to kind of this theme?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Before we started, you began to tell me a story about how you ended up living in Scotland for a while. So you're originally from
the U.S. I lived all over. Went to high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, but right now I'm in Pennsylvania. But my dad is a minister, a Presbyterian minister, and they have a pulpit exchange with the Church of Scotland. So way back, I think this was 2004 or 5, somewhere around in there, we did a pulpit exchange with the church in the Isle of Skye, which is just one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And so we lived in a church-owned house there right on the ocean, a place where there's more sheep than people. It was just a wonderful experience.
Really neat. What was the most surprising thing about that?
That's, how much it rains in the it rains a lot in northern Pennsylvania. Yeah, I bet it does. It rains a lot in northern Pennsylvania, but man, nothing like the UK. I was very unprepared for that. We were there in the summer, and I packed like one hoodie. And it was not expected to be as cold or as windy as it was, but it was just a really nice experience. We were in the Alaska, as I mentioned, and there's really, not a lot going on there. It's farmland. There's a couple of coffee shops, things like that. So it was really good experience, for slowing down the pace, coming from a big city to there, spending 6 weeks there. I did a lot of reading, spent a lot of times outdoors hiking, and it was just a really good experience for my soul.
Did you bring any of that back with you so that when things get stressful in your current roles that you're able to find that inner peace?
Yeah, stress is tough, especially as you get higher and higher in tech leadership, as I know you are aware.
Absolutely.
I think that's something that I'm constantly having to relearn how to deal with stress. I don't have any tips for you, unfortunately.
I myself always feel better when I meditate, but it's a very hard muscle to keep exercised, as is to the gym.
Both of those, because I always feel I know that ultimately it's the right thing to do for your mind, body, and soul, but it just feels like I could be working. It feels like a waste of time in the moment, but it's something I'm struggling with. Yes.
Well, that's how I actually am able to convince myself that doing this podcast is not a waste of time, because I get to talk to interesting people like you and learn things and solidify my own thoughts, as I just did a moment ago. So it may not be directly work related, but it definitely benefits my work. And it's also almost like journaling, except with I've got mild dyslexia. So journaling is not really a great use of my time. I actually was reading some notes from a meeting I was in the other day, and it's quite possible I had a stroke in the middle of the meeting because I have no idea what the letters even were. So I don't know what that was.
Well, to that point, I think that, it's very important to kind of get outside of yourself and your bubble. Even, I work from home, and it's really easy to, stay in my head. And, I talk with, 20 or 30 people throughout the week, but it's pretty small community that kind of thinks the same way. So, doing things like this podcast and going to meetups and things is a really good way of talking with people and getting other perspectives, which I think can very quickly and easily be translated to, my day-to-day work.
Yeah. Excellent. There was one more thing I was going to say. Gosh, I can't believe I've forgotten it. Oh, yes. So I thought of one more tech thing. What tools do you use? So not, necessarily frameworks or programming languages, but like Confluence, we both mentioned. What sort of tools make it so much easier to do your job?
Yeah, I from a team perspective, we use Jira pretty heavily, pretty ingrained in the Atlassian ecosystem there, Bitbucket, pipelines and Jira and all of that, trying to follow as rigidly as possible the agile software development process. Personally, I love OmniFocus. It was pretty popular a while back, but I haven't seen very many people using it. But it's a really great new app that integrates with Calendar, and it keeps me focused because I can set context. So that like right now is work time and I'm working with client A, I can update the context of OmniFocus so that I'm only looking at tasks related to that client. And it's been really good for managing the noise. Slack, is at this point a necessary evil, but it just gets so noisy. I try to stay out of it and mute channels as much as I can, while still being effective leader. So I think Slack is something that we use that doesn't necessarily make us better or help us communicate.
Yeah, that's one my team and I have been struggling with ourselves. Slack is great for discussions when they can't be done on video chat because they need to be asynchronous. But when it's related to task-based work, it delivers too much urgency, is what we're saying.
Oh, it does. Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, it makes it seem like everything needs to be done now, and it just becomes so noisy.
So we're trying to make sure that we time frame things, put things. We use Trello as opposed to Jira. Now I have that argument in my head all the time. Do we need Jira? Do we need Trello? Do we need Jira? Do we need Trello? Which one should we use? They both have really good benefits and weaknesses.
Do you mind if I ask how big your team is?
9 total.
I'd be interested in hearing your Trello workflow because I've had the same internal debate. I just haven't found a way to making Trello effective for a team that big.
Yeah. So, part of it is we've got we've got 2 marketing, and then our CEO, who is kind of marketing / consultancy / product owner when she's available, because she's doing so much other work. So what we're using is Product Board as kind of our road mapping tool, which is the argument for Jira, is because there's not really a good way to get a higher level overview that drills down without manual work.
Right.
There are integrations between Product Board and Trello so that you can push a ticket from Product Board into Trello. For day-to-day development, Trello just wins.
Yeah.
For road mapping and timelining and all the things that are already hard, Trello does no favors.
Right, because it's hard to define sprints and stories and things like that, right?
Well, and I think our biggest problem beyond tools is not having a real product owner or a real Scrum Master, one or the other, or some hybrid, or a PM, or whatever you want to call it, right? There's nobody managing the process. I'm trying. It's not a strength I have. It also, I'm already doing the other 2 full-time jobs of trying to develop code and develop a team, and then trying to do something that I'm really bad at on top of it is not great. I know that is a big failing of mine for the team, and I haven't come up with a solution yet, but we keep trying new things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, keeping a little bit of the bits that do work and moving the bits that don't. But I don't know. Do you have full on Scrum Masters or?
So it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because often when an interim CTO comes along, it's really the CEO, and he sometimes handles the business decisions, or sometimes there's a COO, and then the development team, and that's it. So as you referenced there, the CTO really takes on the role of lead architect, development manager, as well as project and product manager, which is a huge effort, a huge task, one that's really impossible for one person to do. So project manager, and if the startup has the funds, a product owner are definitely the first hires I make. And we did that for this startup here. I know just enough about Agile to make mistakes.
Same boat.
Exactly. So I like to have someone who really knows what they're doing, and who can come in and really properly train the team in the Agile methodology, as well as set up sprints and understand the product well enough to delegate to developers. But I think that's really something that should be one of the first things that gets off the CTO's plate, so they can focus on really CTO things. But obviously, it is one of the things that is expected of the interim CTO, until someone else brought on to do that. We have a project manager, and we have a product owner. I'm probably going to hire 1 or 2 more product owners as we create new products for them. We actually hired an outside consultancy to come in and do a 2-day training on Scrum and Agiles for both project manager as well as the entire team. That's been a pretty good investment as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've tried to make the wrong thing fit into the box that we need. Obviously, a good PO, PM, Scrum Master, whatever that set of skills that will bring your team up to a full complement. they have to be a pretty senior person to actually understand the different areas, especially if you're trying to squeeze them all into one person. And, I've tried to figure out how to do that with junior people and interns and all sorts of different things. Cause I think it's Google that hire, smart people out of college and then make them product managers.
Right.
Because they understand the tech, but they already have senior product managers to mentor them. So it doesn't work if you just throw them into the
That's
sharks.
Exactly right. Yeah, you can't. I mean, as soon as you hire a junior project manager, then you're ultimately going to still be doing that. And all this costs money, so it's really a tough decision for some startups. Based on their financial capabilities, which again is the whole problem I'm trying to solve with interim CTO. I'm there to provide PM, PO leadership as needed from the beginning, but trying to get them to have a full-time one pretty early on is pretty beneficial for their product and company as a whole. You just have to convince them of that.
Yeah, that's this is the other thing in my head, is that how we can do this without having more overhead than we have horsepower.
Right.
That's why you're in charge, right?
That's exactly problems like this, right? With no money.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not. Sorry, go ahead.
I've been fortunate enough to have been working with some pretty well-funded startups. So a lot of these challenges, I've been fortunate not to have to deal with as much as maybe you or others. Not to, that sounded insulting. I apologize.
No. We're mostly bootstrapped. We have some investment, but it's still, a lot of it is through consultancy. So
right. Yeah.
We have to.
So, you'll have your own challenges related to that. So yeah, it's tough. There's no, blanket answer, unfortunately.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bitching per se. I'm just trying to express that it's hard. And
it is.
Anybody out there who's listening, this is probably the hardest thing, is trying to stay out of people's way, but have enough process so that it's understandable. You can't have people go off into black holes of code, which is where most of us developers want to be. You can't do that, because the marketing team, or the whoever is dealing with marketing. I mean, I believe everyone is part of the marketing team and everyone is part of the product team. But the people who do the day-to-day marketing elements need to know when bits of the product will be available to begin the process of implementing marketing. So
that's right.
It's just hard, and I have no answers for you, and I'm very sorry, but I think it's just one of those things that you have to understand, that is the challenge.
Yes.
Way more than, did we use the right algorithm for this sort?
Yeah, that's right. And that's another thing that I've had to learn along the way. As you're given more and more responsibility and leadership in whatever company, you start to look more and more big picture. All the problems that you're dealing with now, and how to make sure things scale properly, and we can handle growth in the future. When really a lot of times you just need to step back, take a day at a time, make good decisions towards that end goal on a daily basis, and you'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, that's awesome. How can people? Or actually, I want to go back to CTO Sumo for just a second. So you're currently in closed beta. Is that right?
Currently in private beta. Really, I'm trying to develop this product the right way. A year or so ago, created a landing page with marketing copy and got a mailing list set up. And so, right now it's in private beta. I'm collecting interested parties, and then working with my current clients, as use cases for this product. I think early next year, I should probably be opening it up for new clients. It's unfortunately one of those projects that does not scale well. I'm the interim CTO, and I do have some colleagues that I do use for this as well. But I can't have 100 or 200 clients immediately. So it's tough to see how a strategy for how to grow this, which is why it's private beta at the moment.
Okay, but if anybody is interested,
yes, go to CTOs.com and sign up for the early access.
Yeah. And I'll put the link in the show notes.
Yes, thank you.
How else can people contact you? Where's the best place?
W Youmans Dev on Twitter is my personal and professional Twitter handle.
Okay, I don't think I had that one. If you would send that to me,
I will do that.
Then that'd be great, and then I can make sure that we get connected there.
I'll do that.
Okay, is there anything else you want to bring up, talk about?
I think that's it. I appreciate your time.
No, I appreciate yours. This was great. Really enjoyable discussion, and it's I always learn things from smart people out there that are somewhat like me.
Yeah, and I appreciate
great.
your perspective, and it's comforting to know you're dealing with some of the same problems that we are. So
same.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.